All right, let's do this. Kevin Leatherman, Leatherman Homes, good to have you. I mean, first, I don't think I can let this go without sharing the fact that this was supposed to be an IG Live, and you thought an IG Live was something that you did in person. So you came to the office, hence you being in my podcast studio right now, which is just a little funny, sir. I'm sorry.
It's a little funny. That's because I was distracted because I wanted to prepare for the content, Charles. So you got me.
All right, so I put a bunch of videos about this. Everybody wants to know what's going on. People are freaking out. So just a little bit of backstory. Why don't you tell everybody about the lawsuits that have been going on across the country, the settlements with the different brokerages, and just bring everybody up to speed, because I've noticed some agents know what's going on, and then some agents are completely clueless. I had no idea until you called me the other day, and frankly, I just like being the Barbara Walters of real estate right now.
Oh, okay, great. But first, I just need to get a disclosure out of the way. So as many of you know, I currently serve as the 2023 President-elect of the Long Island Board of Realtors. I'm not here today in that capacity, and therefore, I'm certainly not speaking on behalf of the association. I'm here today as a real estate broker of Leatherman Homes, just to get that out of the way. We're also, just to make sure we're covered here, we're going to respect antitrust laws, and we're not going to speak about specific percentages or dollar amounts, and understand all brokers can have their own business models. And lastly, I'm not an attorney, so the information discussed today is my own personal views. Some of the things discussed here today may change as we all learn and things come forward from LIBOR, 1 key, NISOR, and NAR, and so forth. So it's recommended that all agents follow the legal instructions of their broker or manager, and they should consult with their broker's attorney or NISOR legal helpline accordingly. So now we got that out of the way. All right. So I just don't want anybody to misunderstand where I'm coming from. So what I called you about the other day, Charles, was the class action lawsuits involving the plaintiffs. It's the Department of Justice against NAR, and some of the major real estate franchises have been working their way through the courts the past couple of years. It's coming to a head. There's a trial next month. But the punchline, what's happened over the past month, Anywhere Brands, which is the owner, that's the former Realogy company, they own Coldwell Banker, Century 21, ERA, Better Homes and Gardens, Sotheby's, International Realty, and Corcoran. They settled for $83.5 million, and RE/MAX just settled within the past 2 weeks for $55 million. As part of these pending settlements, they're not fines, they're settlements. Those real estate organizations they're before the judge right now, pending the judge's approval, and they're going to have to change their business model, their business practices, I should say, not business model. Sorry about that. So what I'd recommend is, because we're not attorneys, Charles, I'd recommend everybody just Google the NAR lawsuits. They'll get a lot of information. The other thing is, if they just go on to Stratus and they connect to RIS Media, they already have that free from 1 key MLS. They can get it. They can get all the articles right on their computer or mobile device right from Stratus. So
in layman's terms, right? But that makes sense. And if you're looking to really like read in depth, those are great resources. But kind of like in layman's terms, I mean, I'm not licensed. And frankly, I'm happy I'm not licensed in this particular scenario. Kind of the nuts and bolts about what went on. How long has this been going on for?
It's for a very long time. So, but the real issue with the Department of Justice, what they have, the antitrust issue that they basically have, is that listing brokers require a seller to pay compensation to a buyer's agent. So in other words, it's not optional. So a listing broker can say, if you list with me, here's how we're going to do it. And they basically don't ask you if you like it or if you want to negotiate it. They basically just tell you, here's how it's going to be. So the focus has really been the agent is negotiating the total compensation, and then they're not really giving the seller the opportunity to negotiate how much they're paying out to a buyer's agent. In other words, they're pretty much, I guess you could say, saying it's required. All right.
Okay,
and what
got it.
Department of Justice says is it shouldn't be required. So therefore, what really happened on Thursday was 1 key MLS modified their policy, whereby it used to be you had to offer an amount. The amount could have been a penny. So now the new policy was, they said, now you just have to offer an amount, and an amount can be 0. Okay. So it's just cleaning it up. This is the starting point of going down that road. So we're starting to unbundle the seller being responsible to pick up the expense for both brokerages in several situations, not necessarily all.
Okay, so, and to your knowledge, have any 0%, now that it can be done as of Thursday, have you seen or do you know of any 0% listings that have actually hit the market? Like, is this a real thing? Is it actually happening?
Yes, I do. Friday, I posted my first 0 listing. So it's interesting. I posted it as a coming soon. It's 4 Rose Street. It's a co-op in Oceanside. I posted my first 0 as a coming soon. We're doing photography tomorrow. It's probably going live Wednesday morning. Interestingly enough, I've already had agents contact me. They're ready to show it. And they didn't say boo about the listing offering 0 compensation. So clearly the agents who contacted my office to schedule an appointment, when it does go live, they've obviously have figured out how they're going to get compensated when they negotiate with their buyer client.
So, I mean, either that or they didn't read the listing. Because a lot of people don't read the listing.
They're very savvy. They're 2 very experienced agents in the marketplace with 25 years plus experience. They know exactly what they're doing.
So I think this is actually a question that's worth taking at this point. So Grace had asked, is this just does this impact just Long Island? Is this a national thing? It sounds like it's a national thing.
Well, one key MLS more or less followed what Bright MLS did. And what happened is the MLSs across the country, and the question's excellent, the MLSs across the country are all pretty much, in my opinion, going to be doing this because they want to make sure that they're not contributing to a potential antitrust problem. So what NAR did a couple months ago, I believe it was, what they did is they came out with a new interpretation because Bright MLS, which serves about 7 states around the DC area, they came out and they modified their MLS rule to say they're going from an amount to 0. And they did that, and NAR didn't change their rule or anything. What NAR did do was change their interpretation of the rule. And they said it used to be the listing broker just had to offer an amount. So now they're saying, NAR is saying 0 is an amount. Got it. A figure. So what NAR did is they did a pivot and they did that. So this is where we're going. But as far as getting back to these lawsuits, so now you have Anywhere Brands and Remax are in for settlement with the court. You have Keller Williams and basically the parent company, Home Services America is the parent company of Berkshire Hathaway. They are due to, they're going to be going to trial in October, and so is NAR. So I tend to think there's going to be more settlements. So it's cheaper to settle than it is to go through the litigation, because if you go through the litigation, it's, in my opinion, it's probably going to cost them more money. But these real estate franchisors really stepped up. I really want to give a shout out to them, because what they did is they took this and they're absorbing the total expense of the lawsuit. So they're paying for it, not their franchisees, not their agents, and not their brokers. So what they did is, I think they did it smart. At least they know this is the total dollar amount they have to put towards this settlement, the class action lawsuit, and then they have to amend their business practices going forward so that this way they won't have any conflict going forward. So to me, that makes business sense.
So did the Justice Department just go after the big brokerages, or are they going after pretty much everybody that has a certain level of business?
Well, Charles, excellent question. I think this is the start. I think they started here, but the Department of Justice is not prohibited from going after other defendants. So they can go after the independent brokerages. They can go after other franchisors that were not mentioned. So this is Pandora's box opening up. So let's talk about kind of the nuts and bolts of what's going to happen here. So obviously the documents that you use to list a house are going to be different. There's going to be obviously heavy buyer agency now. Like what does it look like now from a paperwork standpoint in a transaction with when you have 2 agents? Sure. Well, I think to really make this clear for everybody, in most situations, again, I can't say all, but in most situations, the seller was the one that was legally obligated to pay both real estate brokerages, the listing broker and the buyer's agent. All right, because that was because of the listing agreement and the language that was contained therein and what was negotiated with the listing agent. So the legal obligation was really on the seller. However, the buyer's the one that's really always funded it, because the only individual going into a closing room is the buyer. So the buyer's coming in with their checkbook and their mortgage proceeds if they're financing. So what I believe is the new world, now that we're having a pivot here, I think the seller is still going to be responsible legally for paying their listing broker. However, it's going to be optional if they want to offer compensation to the buyer's agent. So there will be sometimes that it's business as usual, that the seller is still going to be legally obligated to pay both brokers, but there will be sometimes, and with some business models or on specific listings, where the seller will only be responsible for paying his own broker, and then the buyer's agent will be financially and legally obligated with his buyer representation agreement. However, in both situations, the buyer is the one still funding this at the end of the day, because the buyer is the only one walking into the closing room with money.
No, that makes sense. So there's a question that popped up that I think is very important. Then I have a question for you to kind of just, lay it out simply. Somebody had asked, what goes on with existing listings? So if you have an existing listing, is that status quo? Does it have to be amended? What goes on with existing listings?
I would assume it's status quo, but I also would say if a listing agent wanted to reach out to their client and renegotiate it, I don't see a problem with them renegotiating something. It's the same thing. You renegotiate an extension of a listing. There are sometimes, if a listing is difficult to sell, sometimes an agent goes back to the seller and asks for a higher commission and therefore possibly a higher payout. I mean, if the seller, it's a business tool. Commission's a business tool to agents. So yes, you can, but I don't. For a practical matter, I don't think a lot of agents are going to be rushing out changing what they.
No, I don't think so either. So let's use like a real world example here, and this is the way I understand it. And please correct me if I'm wrong. From this point on, you can, or you are supposed to, sit down with a potential seller and say, hello, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, this is what I'm going to do for your house. I'm going to market it, social media, all these things. And for my services, I get 4% or 2% or whatever you want to put in there, right? Now, there are going to be other agents that could potentially be bringing buyers. Do you want to compensate them or no? Is that an accurate?
Well, Charles, I think where the real pivot is here, as opposed to agents focusing on the total compensation, I think what I'd recommend is agents should really go in with their value proposition, and they should explain to the seller, I charge X% for my list side, and here's everything I do from A to Z for you, Mr. or Mrs. Seller. I think that they should focus their energy there, and then I would just add the language and say, and Mr. Seller, what would you like to add on for the incentive to pay the buyer's agent? Because I think you have to start unbundling, all right? Because that's pretty much where we're going and where I see this industry going. So focus on your listing proposition, your value add, focus on pitching your listing, and separate, making sure you get paid as a listing agent, how you want to negotiate that, and then it's a different subject for how much they want to add on. But you also have to educate the seller. They're not required to add on. However, a real estate brokerage can have a business model where they require their agents to have an add-on. In other words, because here's the problem. On the listing agreement, you have a total compensation, so whatever it is, X. The problem is that is the maximum the brokerage, so if it's ABC company, the maximum check they can get at a closing table is X, because X is the total. So whether you have two agents involved, whether you have the listing agent and maybe the other one signed a buyer representation agreement, they worked as a dual agent, the total compensation is capped in New York State per Department of State, and a lot of agents aren't aware of this, but right now, and even before Thursday, you are not allowed to take more than the total, okay? I do know for a fact, I've heard some companies are doing that, it's wrong, and they can have a serious violation there with licensing law. You're not allowed to charge more because the Department of State took the position that the brokerage was retained by the seller and they've agreed to this total, and you can't then go execute a different agreement with a buyer client in the same brokerage and charge more than what the total is. So if somebody wants to write a zero listing, for example, whatever your total compensation, that has to cover if the listing agent sells the listing themselves, that X total is all they're going to get, point one. Point two, if you're working in a brokerage where you have more than one agent, so let's say if I list a property and Jackie brings the buyer, whatever that total compensation is in X, that's the only money we're getting at the closing table. So whatever our arrangement is in-house, that's the total. You can't charge more than X. What I think the real issue is on writing a zero listing is you have to have enough money to satisfy the listing brokerage, whether you have one or two agents on an in-house deal. And conversely, what do you do with the commission if a buyer's agent comes in and rolls their buyer representation compensation into their buyer agency compensation into the offer? So if they incorporate it into the offer, then the issue is, does the listing broker keep X, or is it X minus whatever? It's kind of like going back to when we had short sales in the marketplace, and people would say if there was a listing written at a certain percentage and the short sale bank or banks lowered the commission, how was the commission split between the two brokerages, right? Because and then agents were putting that on the MLS as far as what the policy would be if there was a shift. I think what's different here is all of the MLS agents do not know what the total compensation is, because they only see on the MLS what's offered out in the compensation fields for what they would receive. They do not have any knowledge of what the total compensation is.
No, I understand. That makes sense. I mean, I think one of the big points that people are probably rattling in their head right now is, you know, let's do a fictitious scenario or a real scenario. There's a listing out and it's a 0% listing. You have, you know, Remax over here. You have Signature Premier over here, and agents coming in with a buyer. What are buyers' agents going to have to do now? Are they going to have to come in with a real value prop? Are they going to have, you know, buyer brokerages executed prior? Is this something they can do right before they put the offer in? Like, I think how this really impacts most agents is you have listing agents, you have powerhouse listing agents like yourself, like Brian Karp, like people that do, you know, 50, 100 plus listings a year. And then you have way more agents that are working with buyers, and they can do just as well, if not better. But how is this going to impact how they work with their buyers? They have to have a certain value prop. They have to have certain docs. Like, how do they position it on their end to make sure that the person just doesn't go straight to the listing agent?
Well, I think what's going to happen is, and what I would advise a lot of agents right now is go for your ABR, an accredited buyer representation designation from NAR. It's I think a 40-hour course. I took that years ago with Adorna Carroll. She's fabulous. I would highly recommend every agent, manager, and broker get as much education as they can, as quickly as they can, about buyer representation, because what the agents really need to do, if you're going to take somebody out to look at 3 houses on Saturday and one of them might just happen to be a 0 listing, you need to understand how you're going to get paid. So I really want to even just back up a sec, Charles. The concept here is I want to cooperate. So I wrote a 0 not for the purpose of not cooperating. I want to cooperate. I want agents to show the listing. And I'm fine if they roll their compensation in. It's more or less like a seller concession. They're making it a condition to the offer. So if the buyer wants to offer $500,000 and the agent wants to charge Y, they incorporate that into the transaction. So then the seller I tell the seller, this agent John's coming in with an offer, it's $500,000 minus Y for their buyer agency compensation. So the seller's going to get $500,000 minus Y, and then the seller's going to have to settle with my agency for whatever they're due, according to the listing. I think the issue is, really what it comes down to is, what happens to my total compensation on the listing? Do I keep that total, or is there a contingency to give some of that, to reduce that number because I didn't procure the buyer? Because if you look at a listing that's paying out compensation, right now, if a listing is paying out Y, then what happens is, if I didn't procure the buyer and that agent rejects that offer of compensation, they charge more or whatever they do, I don't get to keep the whole pie of what I wrote the listing at. I only get to keep my listing portion because I didn't procure the buyer.
Depending on how you structure the listing agreement with the seller.
Correct, but this is different And also, I just want to clarify, because you had mentioned the paperwork. My understanding, and I can be wrong, is that the only one authorized to change the standard listing agreement paperwork is the seller and the seller's attorney. So my understanding is realtors are not allowed to modify that standard agreement. If you're going to have some sort of different written agreement for a zero listing, you should really put it on a rider, and then you should have your management and possibly brokerage's attorney review it to look at the legal language, because it really is a rider to the agreement. So if there's any contingent arrangements with compensation, it should be in there. So what's fundamentally different here is you can have a contingent compensation that is not disclosed to all the MLS agents.
So I think what a lot of people are thinking, myself included right now, is how and when does this start to impact people? Like, obviously, people are paying $55 million, $85 million is a huge amount of money, right? Obviously, things have to change. When do they start changing? How do they become enforced so that these big brokerages don't continue to get fines on behalf of the agents for operating? Like, they have to be rolling this out.
I think my prediction, I think buyer representation is going to quickly become the norm. I think, well, look at it this way. If you're going to work buyers, why would you not want to be in control of your own destiny? So whether you have zero listings or not, zero listings are one challenge because it's nothing. However, low paying listings are another problem, right? For certain agents. So if the buyer's agent is not satisfied with what the listing is paying out, the only way to cure that is to take charge of their own destiny, have a consultation with a consumer, get retained as a buyer's agent, and work out what a fair and reasonable compensation is for your work.
Yeah, no, all that makes sense. I think the thing is, if you're a real estate agent that's watching this right now and you have a listing appointment on Saturday, you're thinking, what the hell do I do? Like, I don't want to get in trouble. I don't want to jeopardize my license. Am I writing these things up wrong? Like, what happens now?
Well, I think the first challenge all the brokers need to decide, like, immediately, is if one of their agents gets contacted by a seller and the seller says, look, I heard I can now do a zero listing. I don't need to offer compensation to a buyer's agent. Come over Saturday morning at 10 o'clock. I would list in my house with you, but are you okay with that concept? And there are going to be some brokerages that are okay with that concept and some that are not. So I think each brokerage is going to need to make their own business decision for what makes sense for them. But clearly, buyer brokerage is going to become much more popular, and I think broker agency is going to become much less popular. And I think New York State does not have transactional brokerage, but from what I understand, other states that have transactional brokerage, there is no value proposition. So I think transactional brokerage is going to die a very quick death because there's no value proposition. But we don't have that here in New York, so that's not a problem for us. But
I want to get kind of I was thinking about it, you and I were kicking it around on the phone, and we had difference of opinion. I mean, I guess this could go a million different ways, and nobody knows what's really going to happen. I kind of feel like, I mean, it could be business as usual. I kind of feel like it has potential for everybody to lose in this situation. And by that, I mean, at the beginning, if you're in a hot market, you're going to have certain agents that are going to put out zero listings in the hopes that people are going to come to them directly as the listing agent so they can take all the commission. And then I think over time, what's going to happen is agents will leave the industry because it'll get even harder than it is right now, but there'll be agents that are really hungry, and as a result, they will take 2% listings putting out zero, which I think hurts everybody because now they're really doing their seller a disservice. Their seller's thinks that they're saving money, but in actuality, they're losing money because they're not getting the same exposure and cooperation.
Well, Charles, we have to back up a second. Whatever the percentage is, and I'm just using X, no listing agent can promise a seller the total compensation because whatever figure you come up with and whatever you pay out, okay, a buyer's agent can always come in and incorporate a higher buyer agency compensation that is being offered. So everybody has to really make sure they understand that. No agent, so if you say you're up against two other competitors, no agent can promise the seller what the total is. What they can control is the total that's on their listing with the terms and conditions of that listing agreement. They cannot control another agent and her business model.
No, I get it. And listen, there's a lot of really, really good agents out there, but there's also a lot of people, like in any business, that will, do what they can do to make a fast buck. I'm just trying to think of like all the different angles of what possibly could happen here. I don't know. It's going to be interesting, and especially you have platforms like Zillow, who people pay a lot of money to in order to drive buyer leads, and a lot of agents aren't able to pitch their value in a way that makes people comfortable signing something saying I'm good to go. So
right, but Charles, here's a hint. Right now, New York State does not require a signed buyer representation agreement. Okay. So what you can do, you can take your sales agreement, your offer to purchase, your binder, whatever your company uses, and you can write the offer, put on the offer what your compensation is as a buyer's agent, and you can incorporate that into the offer. You obviously have to disclose and discuss it with your client. You have to then have your client's consent, and they have to then instruct you and authorize you to take your buyer agency compensation from seller proceeds at closing. So, and then if the buyer signs that agreement, and if the agreement is sufficient and it's up to par, then that document covers you. Because again, if you're not being paid from the listing, if the listing's paying zero, or if the listing is paying you something below what you want, just to clarify, if a listing's paying you less than what you want, what you have to do is reject the offer of compensation, and then you have to then come in with what your compensation is and make it a condition to the offer.
Yeah, I mean, the areas that I see this getting kind of interesting is when someone's coming in a 0% listing situation. When someone's coming in with a buyer, they can either say, hey, listen, we're going to offer 500 and it's going to be net 490 to you. Or they can then they can say to their buyer, hey, you really want this bad, you pay me the commission, so it's 500 and you pay me $10,000 above and beyond. Like, there's so many different angles of ways that you can now structure this deal that could either potentially get your buyer a property or have your buyer lose a property. Because so in that scenario, if someone's coming in with the same $500,000 offer, but one is net, like net the commission, and the people are going to pay the commission on top, that couple, that whoever that is going to get that deal.
Right, but Charles, let's just say, let's go back to a traditional listing. If a listing agent says they're going to do a discount if they double end the deal, so if they're the sole listing and selling broker, if they're offering an incentive to the seller, which is less than the total compensation on the listing, number one, that agent has to let agents with offers know that, because they have a competitive advantage, whatever that may be. So the agents are supposed to do that. The other thing is, agents should really understand, buyer agents, when they convey offers, the way this is supposed to work, according to the National Association of Realtors, NAR's Code of Ethics, the listing agent is required to send over the offer and the pre-approval or the proof of funds or whatever it is. They're supposed to send that to the seller. So whatever they're writing on their offer, if it says how they're getting paid or whatnot, that's getting conveyed. So the listing agent's not in charge of that. The good buyer's agent is writing, and even a broker's agent is writing on their offer whatever it is, and that information, those documents, should be going to the seller, and the seller should be reading that and then having a consultation with their agent, say, what does this mean, and what is the difference in the offers?
Yeah, no, I understand. We're just kind of kicking it around to see. Nobody knows what's going to happen. It might be business as usual. Everybody's doing the same that they've been doing, and it might not impact anybody at all.
But Charles, the goal is not for a buyer's agent not to make money. I mean, that's not the goal. Agents really, you can look at this, the glass is half full or it's half empty. Look at the MLS, one key MLS, that's all your inventory. So to me, I look at that and I could care less what the listings are paying out. I look at that, that's my inventory, what properties match what my buyer client needs. And I don't I don't make decisions on which properties I show based upon what's being offered for the compensation. So whether it's a zero or something that's below target number for me, it doesn't really matter. The issue is, have your relationship with your buyer client, and I think we all have to have some confidence here. The buyers want to purchase a property. They know you're not a Red Cross worker. They know you're going to get paid, and they know they're the ones funding it. And you're their agent, so hopefully they like you and they're doing business with you, so they know you want to get paid. So this is not an adversarial situation here. We have to really put this in perspective. This is an opportunity to be transparent. The issue here, what Department of Justice is looking for, is you want to have transparency in where the money is and how it's paid and how it's funded.
No, that makes sense. And listen, I have one more question. Before I get into that, I want to say, A, I love you. I have a tremendous amount of respect for you. I appreciate you coming to do this, as should anybody who's watching this right now. You are here basically on behalf of the agents. You've done a tremendous amount for Long Island agents, and you want to educate people as to what's coming down the pipe to better prepare them to do their job. So thank you very much, and I'm sure everybody that's watching this really appreciates what you're doing. Do you have any suggestions for agents that are watching this right now about how you feel they should handle this, conduct their business, what questions they ask their broker, just anything in general? Because I'm sure there's just a lot of confusion.
Sure. Well, first off, I think listing agents should really focus on having a presentation which talks about their value proposition and how much they want to charge on their list side. Okay? Focus on that and then view the add-on, and then you can get into the pros and cons and what your philosophy is with why you want to incentivize the other side. But I think they should start off with focusing in on making sure they get paid for being the listing agent, a number that makes sense for what the level of services they're providing. And I think it should be very clear and transparent to the consumer that they understand what value you're bringing to the table. Secondly, as far as agents working with buyers, why would an agent really want to work with a buyer customer in this day and age? Because you can work with a buyer customer, they can go back to the property 2 days from now with another agent, they can get retained as a buyer's agent, they write up the offer, and most likely you probably wouldn't win the procuring cause argument, so you wouldn't get paid. You know, it's called theft. I call it theft of services. It's like when you have a little boy steal a Snickers bar at a candy shop when his parents or grandparents aren't looking. So what you really want to do is make sure, but why wouldn't you, and I don't want to go back to the buyer rep agreements. You don't have to start with somebody. This is like dating. You don't just say, look, I want to go steady. We didn't even go on our first date. Why are we going steady? All right. What you want to do is, if you're going out and showing somebody 2 properties, then sign a buyer rep agreement just for those 2 properties. Sign your disclosures. You have to do those anyway, right? So what's one more form? And go over what your arrangement is for how you're going to get paid. And then you'll take them out again maybe next week to a property, sign another one, and then somebody's going to say, do we have to keep signing this form? No, Charles, we can just sign a form for the next 3 or 4 months or whatever we decide if we're comfortable working together, and we'll just specify what the arrangement is. But why not get it signed? And the other thing, just to clarify, I think what a lot of Long Island agents are doing, which is horrific for all of us, is they're taking buyers out without executing the 2 disclosures, the New York State agency disclosure indicating who you're representing and the fair housing form. And just to be clear, the agents are not required to get them signed. The agents are required to request them to be signed. If the consumer refuses to sign them, then you can just sign an affidavit that they declined, put it in your file, and you're still able to go work with them. Okay? I mean, unless your brokerage has some sort of other policy, but as far as the New York State law, you're allowed to still work with them. You just have to request, they declined. But the other thing is, people get real. When you start asking somebody to sign a buyer rep agreement, then you start realizing, oh, you're really not the purchaser, it's your daughter, it's your sister, it's your brother, or the boyfriend, girlfriend, or whoever it is. So why would you not want to understand who your principal is?
No, it makes sense. And I kind of want to say one final thing to agents, because everybody feels this way, and just after 20 years in business, this is what I understand. I'm sure a lot of people are thinking, it's already so hard to do business. Why the hell do they have to make it harder? The unfortunate reality is everything just continues to get harder in every business over time. And you constantly have to be reinventing yourself. So every 3 to 5 years, you got to expect that there's going to be some kind of shakeup. But the good news is, There was a shakeup 3 to 5 years ago. You got through that. Now there's going to be a new shakeup. Everybody will be a little crazy for a little while. They'll figure it out. They'll get back into a groove, and everybody will be okay who's doing business, who's dedicated to doing business, and who will put the work in to figure it out. It's not the end of real estate as well.
Right. No, this is just a point where we're going to pivot, and this is a starting point of a new chapter. It's the same thing when Long Island years ago used to just be seller agency. I mean, buyer brokerage wasn't popular at all. That started to come out. It was transacted, and there were agents kicking and screaming. Some of the smarter agents said, "Wait a second, look who's doing this. How are they doing this? How are they protecting their commission?" The other thing is, I think we should all stop referring to it as a commission. I think we should call it a professional service fee. And what I did is I changed my commission agreements. They're now called it's a professional service fee agreement and a professional service fee receipt. So it's changing the language. Commission is like for salespeople. We want to raise the bar here, raise the level of professionalism. And I think if you look at somebody who, and Charles, I'm sorry because you're no hair, but as far as if a lady wants to go get her hair colored or whatever, all right, she has to schedule an appointment with her stylist or with the colorist, I should say, in advance. All right, but here on Long Island, people just act like they shoot you a text on a Saturday morning. Can you show me this house today? With no appointment, and they just want to wing it. And that's really not right. I mean, some women have to have an appointment with their colorist 5 days in advance. Otherwise, you're not getting your hair colored. So we have to raise the bar for how we want to get treated as professionals. But you also have to deliver the service. And the final thing on that is to make sure we understand when you do sign a buyer rep agreement that you're working with somebody for an exclusive time period, you have to service them. This is very different servicing buyer clients, because as a listing agent, you could take your smartphone, you can go to Miami for the weekend, and as long as you have a colleague or somebody that can do legwork for you, you can handle all your negotiations, book all your deals, do whatever you want remotely. When you're servicing buyers, you literally need to service them when you're out of area.
Yeah. No, listen, I get it. And listen, every agent that's on here has dealt with an agent who they think did absolutely nothing in a transaction and is going to get paid, and they don't feel it's right. And I get it. So maybe you're right. Listen, maybe a certain percentage of agents will get pushed out. Maybe this will up the bar and up the level of professionalism with certain agents. I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see, but at the end of the day, before we wrap up, I want to thank you. Everybody that's on here, thanks you. Like, what you did was massive. There's nobody else that's coming forward to, bring this to light and share.
Charles, really, I recommend a lot of agents read. The final thing is, I think some agents are unsubscribed from news information from LIBOR or NISOR or NAR. I highly recommend, I know some people don't want more email, but I think at this point in time, with all the important information coming out, you should contact LIBOR, NISOR, or NAR. Make sure you're getting the information. Also, LIBOR brought Adorna Carroll, who's one of the best trainers in the country. On September 6th, we brought her in to speak to the brokers and managers, and unfortunately, we had a poor turnout. She is going to be coming back, and I think from LIBOR's point of view, they want to start with training the brokers and managers, and I think this is very, very important because the rules are going to change. This is just the starting point. So we all need to be aware, be cognizant that things are changing, and we have to receive that information so we're current.
Yeah, no, awesome. All amazing points. I encourage everybody out there not to freak out. Reach out to your brokers. Reach out to me if you have questions. Obviously, Kevin, we're all on social media. We're a real estate family on Long Island. We're here to help each other. So everyone's going to get through it. It's going to be fine. But really, Kevin, thank you for coming down.
Thank you
really appreciate
so much, Charles. Thank you, everybody.